How cool is this?
It's amazing, especially at my age. No one really gets to say at 22, I am the inaugural poet.
Gorman says she researched the speeches of Abraham Lincoln and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as she began writing.
And then on the Wednesday in which we saw the insurrection at the Capitol, that was the day that the poem really came to life, and I really put pedal to the metal.
Did that change the poem for you?
Definitely. I wanted it to be a message of hope and unity. And I think that Wednesday for me really just underscored how much that was needed, but to not turn a blind eye to the cracks that really need to be filled.
Gorman was named the nation's first Youth Poet Laureate at 19. At 16, she was Youth Poet Laureate of Los Angeles.
I sing a neighborhood anthem for the silence.
Where she was raised by a single mom, Joan, an English teacher.
The anthem will sing, Amanda, drop your R's, but do not drop your volume. Amanda,
and writing became her way over a daunting obstacle.
I had a speech impediment, and so if I couldn't use my voice, then I would author my voice on the page. So it's really been a godsend and a lifeline for me.
How did you overcome it?
Poetry. And, to put it short, spoken word became my own type of pathology. And so once I arrived at the point in my life in high school where I said, you know what, writing my poems on the page isn't enough for me. I have to give them breath and life. I have to perform them as I am. That was the moment that I was able to grow past my speech impediment.
Gorman, who had particular trouble with the letter R, also used music as therapy.
My favorite thing to practice was the song Aaron Burr, Sir, from Hamilton, because that is jam-packed with R's. And I said, if I can keep up with, Leslie in this track, then I am on my way to being able to say this R in a poem.
We wild, we want, we stunt, we strive, we hustle, we hungry, we run free, here we come, we one country, we ain't done, see.
So how do you feel when you are performing these poems?
When I am on stage, I feel electric. I feel like I could breathe fire. I feel like I am summoning the energy, not only of myself, but of my ancestors.
But the point of protest isn't winning. It's holding fast to the promise of freedom, even when fast victory isn't promised.
Poetry is a weapon. It is an instrument of social change. And poetry is one of the most political arts out there because it demands that you rupture and destabilize the language in which you're working with. Inherently, you are pushing against the status quo. And so for me, it's always existed in that tradition of truth-telling.
Today, she will do her truth-telling on the steps of the United States Capitol.
How do you prepare for something like this?
One of the preparations that I do always whenever I perform is I say a mantra to myself, which is, I am the daughter of Black writers. We're descended from freedom fighters who broke their chains and changed the world, they call me. And that is the way in which I prepare myself for the duty that needs to get done.
Mr. President, Dr. Biden, Madam Vice President, Mr. Emhoff, Americans, and the world. When day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? The loss we carry, a sea we must wade. We've braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace. In the norms and notions of what just isn't always just is. And yet the dawn is hours before we knew it. Somehow we do it. Somehow we've weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. We, the successors of a country and a time where a skinny Black girl descended from slaves and raised by a single mother can dream of becoming president, only to find herself reciting for one. And yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine, but that doesn't mean we are striving to form a union that is perfect. We are striving to forge our union with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. And so we lift our gazes not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first. We must first put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to none and harmony for all. Let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true. That even as we grieved, we grew, that even as we hurt, we hoped, that even as we tired, we tried, that we'll forever be tied together, victorious, not because we will never again know defeat, but because we will never again sow division. Scripture tells us to envision that everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. If we're to live up to our own time, then victory won't lie in the blade, but in all the bridges we've made. That is the promised glade, the hill we climb, if only we dare it, because being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it. We've seen a force that would shatter our nation rather than share it, would destroy our country if it meant delaying democracy. And this effort very nearly succeeded. But while democracy can be periodically delayed, it can never be permanently defeated. In this truth, in this faith we trust, for while we have our eyes on the future, history has its eyes on us. This is the era of just redemption. We feared it at its inception. We did not feel prepared to be the heirs of such a terrifying hour, but within it we found the power to author a new chapter, to offer hope and laughter to ourselves. So, while once we asked, how could we possibly prevail over catastrophe? Now we assert, how could catastrophe possibly prevail over us? We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be, a country that is bruised but whole, benevolent but bold, fierce and free. We will not be turned around or interrupted by intimidation, because we know our inaction and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation. Our blunders become their burdens. But one thing is certain: if we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy and change our children's birthright. So let us leave behind a country better than the one we were left. With every breath from my bronze-pounded chest, we will raise this wounded world into a wondrous one. We will rise from the gold-limbed hills of the west. We will rise from the wind-swept northeast, where our forefathers first realized revolution. We will rise from the lake-rimmed cities of the Midwestern states. We will rise from the sun-baked south. We will rebuild, reconcile, and recover in every known nook of our nation, in every corner called our country. Our people, diverse and beautiful, will emerge battered and beautiful. When day comes, we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it. For there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it.
Amanda Gorman, it's such a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited.
Well, just to start, I'll pick up where you've just left off with The Miracle of Mourning. This is a poem that you wrote in this moment. Tell me about how it came to be.
Right. Well, I was really looking around at the news that I and my family and my community was taking in, and I felt like my world and my country was in a very dark place. And so we decided to try to write this poem as a
type of reminder of all the things that we have to be grateful and hopeful for. And really the inspiration for the poem came from watching people in their daily lives. I'm so fortunate that I have a window in my room. So I was watching families take walks. I was seeing dogs outside. I was seeing grandmothers. So I was really trying to incorporate that into the poem. I thought I'd awaken to a world in mourning, heavy clouds crowding, a society storming, but there's something different on this golden morning, something magical in the sunlight, wide and warming. I see a dad with a stroller taking a jog across the street. A bright-eyed girl chases her dog. A grandma on a porch fingers her rosaries. She grins as her young neighbor brings her groceries. While we might feel small, separate, and all alone, or people have never been more closely tethered, the question isn't if we will weather this unknown, but how we will weather this unknown together. So on this meaningful morn, we mourn and we mend like light. We can't be broken even when we bend. As one, we will defeat both despair and disease. We stand with healthcare heroes and all employees, with families, libraries, schools, waiters, artists, businesses, restaurants, and hospitals hit hardest. We ignite not in the light, but in lack thereof. For it is in loss that we truly learn to love. In this chaos, we will discover clarity. In suffering, we must find solidarity. For it's our grief that gives us our gratitude, shows us how to find hope if we ever lose it. So ensure this ache wasn't endured in vain. Do not ignore the pain. Give it purpose. Use it. Read children's books, dance alone to DJ music. Know that this distance will make our hearts grow fonder. From a wave of woes, our world will emerge stronger. We'll observe how the burdens braved by humankind are also the moments that make us humans kind. Let every dawn find us courageous, brought closer, heeding the light before the fight is over. When this ends, we'll smile sweetly, finally seeing. In testing times, we became the best of beings.
Well, it's funny because that was going to be one of the questions I asked you is it difficult to write? Is it difficult to be creative in this time where so many people are struggling, and a lot of people are having depression now, and it's hard to find the positive, but you didn't seem to struggle anyway.
I will be honest and say that the struggle is there. I think of hope not as an end state, but really as a struggle, as a journey, as something that you have to continuously fight for. And for me, as I reflect and I was writing that poem, I was thinking about, Martin Luther King writing from a Birmingham jail, a letter on racial injustice. I was thinking about Nelson Mandela writing and reading while he was in jail for decades. I was thinking of Anne Frank writing while she was hiding from Nazis. And so all that is to say, I was thinking about, what do humans do when they are scared and alone and isolated from the rest of the world? And often it's truth telling, and it's telling stories that matter no matter what. And so I was trying to remind myself of that past, to say, as challenging as this might feel right now, we've gone through a lot worse. And if this poem can shed any light, I'm glad to add that.
Well, as I mentioned, you wrote this during the pandemic, which feels like forever, but actually isn't that
Yeah.
a huge amount of time? Do you normally write as fast as you wrote this one?
Oh, that's a fascinating question. I would say usually my poems tend to be expedited. I see something, I latch onto it, and I want to chase it down. So that poem was probably written over 2 days. I would love to see a chapter in my life in which I can take more time in a poem, but right now where so much is going on, I'm really responding to events as they unfurl. So that was very fast paced for me.
And how do you know when you have it?
It's a leap of faith. You really don't. For me, it's not aiming for a specific way that the poem should look or the specific words that it should have. I'm really after an end point, which is a feeling. How do I feel when I read this poem? How do the people around me feel when I share with them? And if I can access that type of emotion, which for this one was hope, then I've done the best that I can do.
Well, speaking of sharing, I've watched a lot of your poems now and the poems that you've delivered, and there's a performance aspect to them. And I'm wondering how that comes into being when you're writing, if they're two separate aspects, or you write knowing that you will be verbalizing them.
That's a great question. For me, I come from both a written tradition and also a very long-standing oral tradition. So for me, poems aren't just about kind of the text that's on the page, which is important to me, but it's also about the performativity, because if I can have someone understand, again, that hope, that light with my hands, with my face, with my vocals, then that helps me get the job done that I need to do. So I don't consider it to be distinct. Particularly for me, growing up, I had a speech impediment. So I was writing to communicate my ideas, and I was also struggling to do that just on an auditory scale. So for me, I learned how to speak by writing poetry. And so those types of art forms are very integrated in my life.
Well, how did that work? How did that help you?
Great question. Well, for example, some things that I would do would be, let's say, listening to the Hamilton soundtrack. I had a very difficult time saying all of the R sounds. And Hamilton has Aaron Burr, Sir Alexander Hamilton. And so if I can rap, if I can do those poetics at that speed and with their intonations, that was helping me figure out how to say the sound. Also, if I'm writing a poem, when I was younger, what I used to do is I would eliminate words that I couldn't say and try to find synonyms. But it got very difficult if I couldn't say R's and I was talking about girls and the world and earth and just all of these things I could not say. And so instead of eliminating my voice, I decided to keep those words in the poem. And every single time that I performed them, use that as an opportunity to practice that sound. And so if I'm reading the poem and the word girl was coming up, I would see that in red text in my head, warning me we need to gear up for this. And so that's just one of the ways in which written text, spoken word, poetry really helped me find my voice in more ways than one.
You're the nation's first youth poet laureate. What opportunity, what responsibility does that bring?
I would say an incredible responsibility. I remember when I was named the inaugural Youth Poet Laureate, there was this feeling of pressure because I knew it was the guinea pig, I knew it was the first one, and beyond that, my naming was a provocation in itself, in that I was Black, I'm female, I'm young. And so there were all these kind of intersectionalities of my identity, which made this beyond the status quo. And so there was an extreme, I think, duty of sense of proving that this title is worthwhile and giving it to youth voices and especially marginalized voices. For me, I'm glad that now I get to kind of live on the opportunity scale of that, which is to say, kind of get over the pressure, breathe out a little bit more, and to really celebrate and mold and improvise with that title as I see fit.
I know you have programs whereby you work with underserved youth. How do you find that poetry does serve them? How is it a way to reach them and help?
Well, I'm the daughter of an English teacher, so the understanding of the power of words in a classroom has always been part of the values of my family. And for me, as I started teaching workshops to young students, there's nothing more electric than seeing that moment of that spark in their eyes where they realize I can write well, and what I have to say matters. And so for me, that's kind of the most important moment. I do a lot of work right now with an incredible organization called 826 National, which is the largest youth writing network in the country. And so for me, it's focusing on that, teaching literacy, but beyond that, how can we help empower students to use their own voice in all of the possible dimensions they can?
So with your mom as an English teacher, was there ever any choice but for you to be the nation's inaugural Youth Poet Laureate?
Sorry, say that again?
I said, with your mom as an English teacher, was there any other path for you other than to be the nation's Youth Poet Laureate?
It's so funny that you say that, because I remember when I told my mom I wanted to be a writer, her reaction was kind of like, oh God. My mom's been incredibly supportive of me. She is my number one cheerleader. But when she looked in my eyes, and I was even still young, and saw that I was very serious, that this was the career that I wanted for myself, she knew that the journey of a writer can be hard, it can be lonely, it can be strenuous, and you're not always compensated in the ways that you should be. And so I think my mom was kind of like, I want any other path if possible. She was kind of like, this writing thing's going well, but your sociology degree, keep that in your back pocket. But what's been really fulfilling for me is, as I've lived my life, not only for my family, but I think for other people and the literary community, I can participate in what it means to reimagine what it is to be a poet. I've done things that I don't think any other poet has done. I mean, like performing at the top of the Empire State Building, like who does that? And that's not to pat myself on the back, but I think we're breathing rare air, where to be a poet now means so much more than maybe it once did.
Well, why is that? You have had these incredible brushes already with Hillary Clinton and Lin-Manuel Miranda, most recently Oprah Winfrey.
Right.
And as you're so young to have this happen, but what does that mean to you? Is it giving license to poets, or yeah, what does it mean to have that wind at your sails?
Right. That's such a great question, because even I look up and I'm like, what is my life? What is going on? I mean, when I met Oprah, it was literally like I was living a dream. And that is to say, Ava DuVernay has this quotation I love, which is, if your dream only involves yourself, your dream is too small. And so for me, my dream, my largest fantasies have been something that's beyond myself. And the larger I can live those dreams, the larger and wider I can make those realities, that's not only an opportunity for me, but as you said, it's a way to invite other people to share that dream with me. It's to invite other young students to, become poets or writers if they want to, and if not, to still live and dream big in whatever capacity.
You've just had your graduation from Harvard. What is it to graduate in this time and to be deprived of that physical gathering?
Right. When I imagine my graduation, I think like most people in the class of 2020, it was really about kind of the physicality of being there, of being in the seats, of seeing your commencement speakers, of being with your family, of tossing your hat up in the air. And to be honest, not having that in that kind of traditional way has just taught me what's most important about those moments. If I can still find a way to celebrate and be joyous with my family. I bring up the fact that I'm the descendant of slaves. Moreover, I'm the descendant of a slave named Amanda. So that type of trajectory from my family being property to generations later, me graduating from a place like Harvard, that speaks to such a larger legacy than myself. And just because I might not be in an auditorium does not belittle that accomplishment in any way, shape, or form. And so I think it's taught me to celebrate how this accomplishment took a village and it took a world to get us here to the point that I can graduate at all. And that's something that keeps me smiling.
Now that you've had this time at home and you are a graduate, you'll have this time. A lot of us have this time to think and to be introspective, to be existential. How are you using this time, and is it all folded into your writing process now?
I think what's so fascinating from what I've been able to see in kind of my global travels is how productivity focused we tend to be in the United States. We have to get something out. We have to be working. And that's part of just kind of how our economic system goes. But I also think it's reminding us that there's some things that are more significant
than that. I think, for example, as a writer, there's this huge expectation I've been seeing that in quarantine, you're supposed to be like writing these books and being very creative and productive at this time. And I'm like, this is hard. There's emotional labor going on. I'm trying to keep groceries in the house. I'm trying to wash my hands, wear my N95 mask. And so not shaming or penalizing myself for not getting a certain number of pages out today. So I'm trying to take both my writing and my life one day, one morning at a time, and meet myself exactly where I am.
That said, there is a line in your bio that indicates you will be running for president in 2036. That's not one day at a time. That's very much very, very much ahead.
That's decades at a time, yes.
But you are running for president?
Oh, yes. I mean, what's so funny is people act like I'm joking. I'm like, I'm dead serious. Like, why wouldn't I be? I kind of looked up, and this happened years ago, and my teacher had said it kind of as a joke to me, like, oh, you should have run for president. I kind of looked at him. I was like, why not? And so I told my family, told my mom, and like, if you ask anyone in my family, we know we're dead serious. If my sister's at a party and someone's taking a photo, she's like, I can't be in that. My sister's running for president 20 years from now. I can't be in a photo with you. And people understand and they move on.
Well, I fully expect, Amanda Gorman, that this interview will be in the Amanda Gorman Presidential Library.
Yes.
I'm counting on it.
In Digital Archive Center. Yes, very true.
Well, before we leave, I know you have one other poem that you're going to perform. I heard from my producers you didn't, as of about 2 hours ago, have a title for it. I'm wondering if you have a title now.
Oh. I did come up with one, and then I was like, scratch that. I will TBD name this The New World. But to give you some contextualization, this is a poem that I kind of wrote reflecting on what it means to graduate here and now in the times that we are in, and what that means for the world.
Well, Amanda Gorman, it's been such a pleasure to speak with you. You are making a world of difference already, and especially right now. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. I'm going to rearrange this because I am little and I have no torso. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much to the Academy for having me. This is so much better and funner than class. I was saying this is going to be, I think, the most educational experience of my week outside of lecture and section. I realized that I actually have 10 minutes to talk, and I was going to actually read 2 poems. What I'd actually like to do instead is to only read one poem, but to have a conversation about how that poem came to be. Because as I was reflecting this morning, I realized that that poem's history that it touches upon intersects directly with this academy as well as with its larger project. As was mentioned, I perform my poetry around the country, and one of the most thrilling things I've been able to do is do a few commissioned poems with CBS this morning. And they always come at me with these big asks. They're like, okay, we want you to write a poem and perform it at the top of the Empire State Building and look at a helicopter and don't fall. And I'm like, am I James Bond, but like spoken word poet version? And I end up saying yes and, doing the poem, and I don't die, and it's all great. But this summer, they actually came with me with quite a big ask, which is to say, to write a poem for the 4th of July, or celebration of our Independence Day. And I was very nervous to say yes, not because I'd be performing in front of 500,000 people and it would be live, or I'd be performing with this huge orchestra of the Boston Pops behind me with the legend Keith Lockhart. None of those reasons were really the reasons of why I was horrified. I was so filled with trepidation because I was worried that if I performed this poem that celebrated the founding fathers, I would then be erasing their humanity and their faults, which inform us of our role and our civic duty today. And I did a little bit of thinking, and I did my homework and my research. I'm a straight A student, so that's what I do. And I tried to think more about my role and what it meant to have a young, Black, female poet writing this poem about our founding fathers. And I remembered Phyllis Wheatley, who was a slave who actually lived right here in Boston, who became the first published African-American poet. Now, at her time, you have to imagine this young, skinny, scrimpy girl who begins writing these poems and publishing them, and it sent a ripple throughout the intellectual elite of that time, to the point that this teenage girl is called into a tribunal here in Boston and made to sit in front of 18 white men who are then going to judge by her prowess the role of Blacks in arts and science. Now, interestingly enough, part of this 18-man panel was actually John Hancock, one of the Academy's founders. And so we don't really know what went down in the room where it happened, but we know that after this tribunal, Phyllis Wheatley leaves with this memento, basically claiming that she is the true author for poems, that she does have the intellectual capacity to create art, and that she does have this role in her own poetry and her own authorship. Well, this was not enough for one of the other founding fathers. Never mind that George Washington had also read Phyllis Wheatley's poems and found that they were phenomenal and actually invited her here to Longfellow House, which had been his headquarters. There was another founding father by the name of Thomas Jefferson, who in Notes on the State of Virginia, which is considered to be one of the most important published documents of the 18th century, in which he writes that not only is it impossible for Blacks to participate in things like science, but particularly that they don't have the capacity for art, and that it makes no sense that a young Black girl could ever write these poems. And so after doing my research and my history, I said, you know what? Thank you, Jefferson. I'm going to write this poem. I'm going to do it. And I bring that up not to necessarily harp on the founding fathers, but I think that if we were to erase their humanity, then we also erase the huge opportunity that is presented to us all to take up their mantle. And so when I decided to write this poem for CBS, I gave myself a few kind of parameters, which is to say, I would recognize the gaps that were left in the work of our founding fathers and also the intellectual academy of the time. And I would take that as my own duty and responsibility to pay that forward, to continue the mission, to not look at the American democracy as something that's broken, but to look at it as something that's unfinished. And I think that's something that this convening represents. We all here know that there is work to be done and there is more work to do. And that's not necessarily something I think that's pessimistic. I think it's actually audacious in the hope that it represents. And so with that in mind, I wrote this poem. Imagine that there's the Boston Pops behind me, and that we're on the Esplanade and there's fireworks. But it's called Believer's Hymn for the Republic. 12 years ago, to be exact, our founders dared to declare the world's most revolutionary act, a pact sworn for liberty and equality. Out of many was born one people, a teeming nation made of nations, at its very foundation, a dream for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Today we gather so that our founders' words do not go diminished, but also so that the work does not go unfinished. For it's not just a declaration of independence, but the everyday declarations of its descendants that make a people equal. It is our right and our role to remember those words scratched on a scroll so we may live them and heal our nation whole. We roll up our sleeves. We believe in the dream, in these American stories, and the glory of the struggle. For it is our struggle that comes our nation's strength. For the lengths we fight for what is right is the fullest measure of our nation's might. And while we cannot shake or cast aside our past, every day we write the future. Together, we sign it. Together, we declare it. We share it. For this truth marches on inside each of us. Americans know one another by our love of liberty, when in fact, we are liberated by our love for one another. We understand that a house divided cannot stand, so let us make a pact to be the country that acts as compassionate as we are courageous. In the Declaration's pages, we write a new order for the ages. Out of many, we are one, bright as a sun and bold as an eagle, a nation of all people, by all people, for all people. Let this 4th of July move forth or cry to redeem the dream as we remember those words forever ignited that we have so long heard and recited, that we are right to stand, but we are revolutionary when we stand united. Thank you.
I was honored that you asked me to write the foreword, but when you first asked me to write the foreword, the first thing I said was, girl,
Yes.
You don't need a foreword. Everybody knows who you are. And I wrote what I believe in my heart. I actually said that your words healed our wounds and resurrected our spirits. I think it was a shot of light, it was just like, whoa, an infusion of light came into people's lives. What's magnificent about this poem, when you analyze it, there isn't a word that is wasted. I'm a poetry reader and have been for years, but my favorite passage or piece of the poem is when you say, we braved the belly of the beast. We learned that quiet isn't always peace. And the norms and notions of what just isn't always justice. And yet the dawn is ours. Before we knew it, somehow we do it. Somehow we've weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. I think that saying our country isn't broken, it's just unfinished is really hopeful. And hope is something we really need more of right now. And you obviously wanted people to feel that when you wrote this. What did you want the takeaway ultimately from the poem to be?
I wanted that to be the takeaway, which is why I'm so glad that you just read it, which for me, I think looking at our democracy as something that's unfinished is both hopeful, but it's also reflective. It's also interrogative, meaning that it both says we have work to do and we can accomplish it. In the poem, I wanted to speak of hope and unity, but it had to be rooted in a sense of purpose and dignity, because I think unity for the purpose of unity without interrogation can just be toxic mob mentality. It's not thinking about what are the reasons that we're linking arms. And so I wanted to really underscore this idea that the American project is a process, and it's not something that I think we've arrived at yet as a country, but something that we can continue to labor for out of love.
Well, as a 23-year-old, to have such discernment and great perspective on everything that's happened, and particularly everything that's happened in recent years with the country's divisiveness, how starkly divided we all have become, how cancel culture has affected almost everyone, how the world literally shifted in front of us during the pandemic, but you were able to do it in one poem. And yes, when you say, and yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine, but this doesn't mean we're striving to form a union that is perfect, which I think people need to be reminded of, because we keep hearing a more perfect union. We've heard that for years. But this doesn't mean we're striving to form a union that is perfect. We are striving to forge our union with purpose.
Please welcome the 14th Librarian of Congress, Carla Hayden.
Thank you. Hello. And welcome. I'm delighted to see all of you here with us tonight for our new Poet Laureates opening reading. You may clap right now. As the Librarian of Congress, I'm charged with appointing the Poet Laureate Consultant in Poetry every year, a position that by law is described as equivalent to that of Poet Laureate of the United States. What an awesome responsibility. The library surveyed over 120 poetry experts from coast to coast, editors and critics, publishers, bookstore owners, and of course, our former Poet Laureates. And in the end, the choice was crystal clear. Please join me in welcoming Tracy K. Smith. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hayden, and thank you, Amanda. I feel so much joy and hope and belief when I hear your voice, Amanda. I know the future is in good hands and that poetry will remain alive and well, so thank you. And Dr. Hayden, it's such an honor to be selected and introduced by you. I remember when I was very young, I started but was never able to finish a poem in which I was trying to imagine the afterlife as a library. And I think I was on to something, because moving through these mammoth buildings, through the hallways, the beautiful halls, and then the underside of the building, all the tunnels, I realized there's something magnificent and divine that's housed here, but there's also something ethereal that is born of the energy and the belief that builds places like this. So I'm extremely grateful to be here tonight, excited about the year ahead, and the conversations that poetry will allow me to have with my fellow Americans. DC is just like such a wonderful, I'm realizing now, this Civil War poem was commissioned by the Smithsonian for an exhibit of Civil War portraits a number of years ago. So, wow, thank you. It's a history that, of course, I've learned about, but I never felt that I had a footing within it. And so being asked to think about it was a real gift, because I had to say, well, what perspective am I curious about? And I wanted to know about recorded testimonies or experiences from Black soldiers of that war and their families. And so I found a number of sources that included letters that many soldiers or their widows or their families wrote to President Abraham Lincoln asking for help in some way, either getting their son paid or finding out if they were free yet. And I also found a number of testimonies from depositions that veterans and their families gave after the war, sometimes for decades and decades after the war, in an attempt to claim pension. Slavery made it very difficult for Blacks to do that because there were not birth certificates or marriage certificates that people had, and so it was very difficult for them to prove that they had served. So reading these documents, I felt like all I wanted to do was make a space for them to exist together as a chorus. And so I'm going to read you two sections from a found poem called "I Will Tell You the Truth About This, I Will Tell You All About It." And these two sections are written really as choruses, that every few lines is a different speaker, but I feel like they're telling pieces of the same story. Excellent sir, my son went in the 54th Regiment. Sir, my husband, who is in Company K, 22nd Regiment, U.S. Colored Troops, and now in the Macon Hospital at Portsmouth with a wound in his arm, has not received any pay since last May, and then only $13. Sir, we, the members of Company D of the 55th Massachusetts Volunteers, call the attention of Your Excellency to our case. For instance, look and see that we never was freed yet, run right out of slavery into soldiery, and we hadn't nothing at all, and our wives and mother, most all of them is a perishing all about, and we all are perishing ourselves. I am willing to be a soldier and serve my time faithful, like a man, but I think it is hard to be put off in such doggish manner as that. Will you see that the colored men fighting now are fairly treated? You ought to do this, and do it at once, not let the thing run along, meet it quickly and manfully. We poor oppressed ones appeal to you and ask fair play. So please, if you can do any good for us, do it in the name of God. Excuse my boldness, but please, your reply will settle the matter and will be appreciated by a colored man who is willing to sacrifice his son in the cause of freedom and humanity. I have nothing more to say, hoping that you will lend a listening ear to an humble soldier. I will close. Yours, for Christ's sake. I shall have to send this without a stamp, for I hain't money enough to buy a stamp. But wait, there's more. I am 60-odd years of age. I am 62 years of age next month. I am about 65 years of age. I reckon I am about 67 years old. I am about 68 years of age. I am on the rise of 80 years of age. I am 89 years old. I am 94 years of age. I don't know my exact age. I am the claimant in this case. I have testified before you 2 different times before. I filed my claim, I think, first about 12 years ago. I am now an applicant for a pension because I understand that all soldiers are entitled to a pension. I claim pension under the general law on account of disease of eyes as a result of smallpox contracted in service. The varicose veins came on both my legs soon after the war, and the sores were there when I first put in my claim. I claim pension for rheumatism and got my toe broke, and I was struck in the side with the breech of a gun, breaking my ribs. I was a man stout and healthy, over 27 years of age when I enlisted. When I enlisted, I had a little mustache and some chin whiskers. I was a green boy right off the farm and did just what I was told to do. When I went to enlist, the recruiting officer said to me, "Your name is John Wilson." I said, "No, my name is Robert Harrison," but he put me down as John Wilson. I was known while in service by that name. I cannot read nor write, and I do not know how my name was spelled when I enlisted, nor do I know how it is spelled now. I always signed my name while in the Army by making my mark. I know my name by sound. My mother said after my discharge that the reason the officer put my name down as John Wilson was he could draw my bounty. I am the son of Solomon and Lucinda Sibley. I am the only living child of Dennis Campbell. My father was George Jordan and my mother was Millie Jordan. My mother told me that John Barnett was my father. My mother was Mary Eliza Jackson and my father Reuben Jackson. My name on the roll was Frank Nunn. No, sir, it was not Frank Nern. My full name is Dick Lewis Barnett. I am the applicant for pension on account of having served under the name Lewis Smith, which was the name I wore before the days of slavery were over. My correct name is Hiram Kirkland. Some persons call me Harry, and others call me Henry, but neither is my correct name. The United States welcomes you. Why and by whose power were you sent? What do you see that you may wish to steal? Why this dancing? Why do your dark bodies drink up all the light? What are you demanding that we feel? Have you stolen something? Then what is that leaping in your chest? What is the nature of your mission? Do you seek to offer a confession? Have you anything to do with others brought by us to harm? Then why are you afraid? And why do you invade our night, hands raised, eyes wide, mute as ghosts? Is there something you wish to confess? Is this some enigmatic type of test? What if we fail? How and to whom do we address our appeal? I think I will kind of wind down with just a couple of poems. I want to read something that's a little bit happy. Okay, this is a poem. My daughter is here, being so perfect and wonderful in the front row. So this is a poem that was written a few years back. It's called 4.5. Morning finds her curled like a prawn around a stuffed blue Pegasus, or the smallest prawn pink lion. Or else she's barging into my room and leaning in close, so it's her hair I wake to, that coarse, dark heaven of knots and purple fluff. And she's hungry, but first she has to pee. Pee, pee, she sings, hopping in place, trying to staunch off the wild, ravenous river she carries until I'm awake for real, saying, go, go, hurry before you wet the floor. And then she tries and succeeds, or else stands bereft, relieved, as a pool trickles out around her feet. She's like an island made of rock, with one lone tree at the top of the only mountain. She's like the sole incongruous goat tethered to the tree, smiling almost as you approach, scraping the ground with its horns, and then lickety-split, lurching hard, daring the rope to snap. She's hungry. She wants bread, toasted with no skin, and enough butter to write her name in. Or a bowl of cereal, but not the noisy kind. She wants a movie, or maybe just the tussle of her will against mine, that scrape and crack, horn on rock, rope relenting one fiber at a time. I want that, she says, punctuating what she just said she wanted. Before I close with one last poem, I want to reiterate my thanks to everyone here tonight, many of whom are family members, teachers, friends, mentors, colleagues in this world of poetry, and of course to Dr. Hayden and Rob Casper and the library staff who've just been so wonderful in making this feel like it's not just a dream, this is real, this is really happening. So thank you. And of course, Amanda, I'm excited to follow your voice. An old story. We were made to understand it would be terrible. Every small want, every niggling urge, every hate swollen to a kind of epic wind. Livid the land and ravaged like a rageful dream. The worst in us having taken over and broken the rest utterly down. A long age passed, when at last we knew how little would survive us, how little we had mended or built that was not now lost. Something large and old awoke. And then our singing brought on a different manner of weather. Then animals long believed gone crept down from trees. We took new stock of one another. We wept to be reminded of such color. Thank you.
Now, a new national voice for poetry. In a tradition dating back to 1937, the Library of Congress selects a prominent writer to serve as the nation's poet laureate for terms that have ranged from 1 to 3 years. The goal, according to the library, to raise the national consciousness to a greater appreciation of the reading and writing of poetry. The new laureate was revealed today, and our Jeffrey Brown had a chance to talk with her earlier this week.
Do you remember what that's called? Is that
empathy and self-awareness through language. That's the creed that comes through in talking with 45-year-old Tracy K. Smith, writer, teacher, spouse, and mother of 3, including 4-year-old twins, and now taking on a very public role as the nation's poet laureate.
This is a position that allows me to kind of profess publicly all that I really hold true privately, that, if we can listen actively enough, if we can put enough pressure on ourselves and our thought process, language can be a real tool of revelation in a way. I love being able to do that with my students and my little seminars, and I love the idea that maybe there's a way that this position allows me to do that with my fellow Americans.
Smith is author of 3 books of poetry, including the Pulitzer Prize-winning Life on Mars, in part an elegy for her father, who served in the Air Force before leaving to work on the Hubble telescope. In her 2015 memoir titled Ordinary Light, she writes of growing up in a tight-knit middle-class family in Northern California. A coming-of-age tale exploring love and loss, race, and faith, a theme that suffuses her poetry.
I wasn't even aware that that's what I was doing until after my last book of poems came out, and I realized, wow, these poems are thinking about space, but they're also searching for God in a way. And I think it comes back to that sense that I grew up with, that there is something large that we can cleave to if we choose to. I wanted to figure out if there was a way that, the artist in me and the 21st century academic in me could find something like a plausible version of God or a plausible version of the afterlife that I'd be willing to claim publicly. And I think that language facilitated that.
Another big area that you're often exploring is race. And in the memoir, you talk explicitly about sort of comparing your upbringing to your parents and your grandparents, the differences there, but also things that have remained.
A lot of my awareness of how race had imprinted my parents, who grew up in the segregated South, a lot of that was shaped by a sense of sadness and a sense of anxiety on my part that made me not want to talk about it. So there were a lot of silences that I was drawn to explore in writing about that time that I had never felt capable of bringing into speech when I was growing up. As I get older, I realize the history that felt so ancient when I was growing up is so close to us and present in ways that I had never imagined or didn't want to let myself imagine when I was a child. So writing about it, I think, is a way of reckoning with what is yet to be resolved, about the present moment and about how we are willing to love each other, even though we look different from one another.
Smith has been a professor at Princeton since 2005 and now heads its creative writing program, teaching small seminars to young poets in the making. Here especially, she says, the emphasis is on how we use language.
Yes, this is our library and one of our favorite classrooms. I want them to start thinking that a poem isn't just an expression of all these things that you're feeling, but it's a set of choices that you're making in language. So every description, every question, every statement, every turn is a choice that opens up or closes off certain possibilities. And you don't always think about that when you're sitting down to write in the flush of emotion. But thinking
the feelings are part of it, right?
The feelings are part of it.
And the expression is part of it, but you're saying
beyond
the
that,
language choices.
Yeah, the language can help you get some traction in those feelings. One of the women greeted me. "I love you," she said. She didn't know me, but I believed her, and a terrible new ache rolled over in my chest.
To hear some of her language, Smith read part of a new poem titled Wade in the Water.
I love you throughout the performance, in every hand clap, every stomp. I love you in the rusted iron chains someone was made to drag, until love let them be unclasped and left empty in the center of the ring.
Now Tracy K. Smith will have a prominent voice, a very public national platform to reach new audiences.
If you think about the tumultuous times we're in technologically, all kinds of changes around us, if you think about the divisions politically of this moment, it seems like an appropriate moment to say, why poetry? Why bother? Why bother being a poet? What kind of impact could you possibly have amidst all that?
I will say that a poem allows or requires you to submit to something else. Often,
submit means...
That's one of the things we don't want to do, to say, okay, I'm not the expert, you're the expert. let me listen. Let me respond to something that's completely counterintuitive for me, or that pulls me toward a different sense of what's valuable. I think when we do that with a work of art, we're learning how to do that in real time with other people.
Does that mean even making us better citizens?
I think so. Poems remind us of that. Poems remind us that someone is saying, come here, this has happened to me, this is how it made me feel, this is who I am in the wake of this thing. And we all have stories like that. And they're important to honor, and they're important also to say, maybe my story helps me listen and cherish this other person's story too.
Smith says a key goal for her as laureate will be to bring poetry into places where it's not often heard,